evening, everyone. Good evening. Good evening. Is the microphone on? I don't think our microphone. Is it working now? Okay. Hopefully our microphone is working now. Good evening and welcome to the 7th annual Morton B. Gulak Lecture and Urban and Regional Planning Lecture. I'm Susan Gooden, Interim Dean and Professor at the Virginia Commonwealth University L. Douglas Wilder School of Government and Public Affairs, and I am so very pleased to welcome everyone here this evening for this exciting annual event. I want to begin by acknowledging Paula Gulak and all of the members of the Gulak family. I would like to ask them to please stand. It is great to see such family support for this lecture year after year. That is one of the special touches of this lecture series. I also want to extend a very special thanks to Jim Smither, who has organized this event and really spearheaded the organizing of the event for this year. Thank you, Jim. And in addition to the Gulak family, I'd like to thank all the supporters of this event. And I would particularly like to thank our signature sponsors of this event, Purcell Construction Corporation, Glave and Homes, and the VCU Foundation. This is a very special evening for many reasons. Tonight, we honor the memory of our esteemed late colleague, Morton B. Gulak. Mort served the university with distinction for nearly 4 decades and was one of the founders of the Masters in Urban and Regional Planning program at VCU. I had the pleasure of working with Mort as a member of the faculty when I first arrived at VCU. And his warm personality and his outreach, both to colleagues and students, were just a big piece of his identity and part of his memory that I will always respect and revere. During his career, he inspired legions of students in the areas of urban design, urban revitalization, physical planning, and the application of professional planning methods. Mort's outstanding contribution to the world of professional planning practice, both in Richmond and in communities around the globe. As a matter of fact, I traveled with Paula and Mort to Turkey, so I can definitely say around the globe, were the impetus for the Gulak Lecture, which brings leading experts in planning, architecture, or urban design to VCU year after year. I would also be very remiss as interim dean if I did not take a moment to share with you and to flaunt a bit about some of the recent successes of our Wilder School faculty, students, and staff. We have such a talented group of faculty and staff. And for those of you who have not had the chance to, hopefully you saw the slideshow that highlighted some of the events. But you'll notice that the 2018-2019 academic year continued a long reign of tremendous accomplishment for the Wilder School. We rose 5 more spots in the rankings of U.S. News and World Report. We're now ranked at 39, and we're tied for the top-ranked School of Public Affairs in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Wilder School faculty and students also received 11 competitive national awards across all of the disciplines in the Wilder School. And so it is in this spirit that we are excited to kick off a wonderful academic year with our signature program, the Gulak Lecture. This is an exciting year. We hope that you will continue to engage with us in many more events throughout the year. So with that, I'd like to welcome my colleague and the organizer of tonight's event, Jim Smither, to introduce our guest speaker. Thank you.
Susan. Thank you, Susan. I had a wonderful afternoon with Gary Hack, just touring around Richmond, and he gave us 2 thumbs up, so that's a good start for tonight. Gary Hack is an eminent scholar, practitioner, who writes and lectures on large-scale physical planning and on urban design. His current work examines autonomous vehicles and other emerging transportation modes and their impact on cities. Dr. Hack is a professor emeritus at and former dean of the School of Design at the University of Pennsylvania. Prior to joining Penn, he was professor of urban design and head of the Department of Urban Studies and Planning at Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Dr. Hack also studied and has taught and practiced urban design for more than 40 years, developing plans for cities, neighborhoods, and developing areas in over 35 cities in the United States, Canada, and Asia, including New Orleans, New York, Detroit, Bangkok, and Taipei. The title of his lecture tonight is The New Mobility and the Sustainable City, Challenges and Opportunities. Join me now in welcoming Gary Hack.
Thank you very much, Jim. I want to warn you that I have I'm getting off of a cold, and so my voice is going to be coming and going through the evening. So bear with me if you don't mind on it. I want to also thank the sponsors and the Department of Urban and Regional Planning for inviting me here. It's a real honor. Especially Jim Smithers for organizing this event and for giving me, along with Andrew Moore, a wonderful tour of the city in 3 hours. I was last in Norfolk or in your great city, not Norfolk, when about 23 years ago. And I have to say, it's an extraordinary set of changes that have occurred in the last 23 years. I haven't been in a city for many years that's made as much progress in revitalizing the center of the city as you have here. Wonderful residential neighborhoods, converted warehouses and factories and other kinds of things, an emerging arts district, and a lot of other things that are going on in this city. I also am honored to speak in a lecture named after Morton Gulak. I knew Mort only by reputation, although as I figured out the years, I made a decision to go to MIT rather than Penn for my PhD. And I realized that if I'd made the decision to go to Penn, I would have been his classmate at Penn at that time. He was an extraordinary planner who believed in linking ideas and action. He was the person who I think was perhaps most responsible for creating a planning program here at VCU. And I think he also left behind some of the plans for the actions that have been taken. I found, for example, that he did a plan for West Broad Street in 1998, which helped guide some of the revitalization efforts in that area. I believe in linking research and action, and Mort was a kindred soul in that sense. I'll be speaking tonight about the subject of streets and how they will need to be redesigned, rethought in response to social and economic and technological changes. It was good to see how many of the streets in Richmond have already begun to be changed. The introduction of the BRT system along Broad Street, which has changed the way the patterns of movement along that street and brought new ways, new kinds of mobility into the center of the city. The sidewalk cafes that are emerging in that area and are complementing the theaters and the live theaters and other kinds of activities that are taking on steam in that area. The intersection landscapes that have been slowing traffic in many of the residential areas here. So the streets have been changing here in Richmond, but I think that in fact what we're up for is a order of magnitude of change as a result of new technologies and new people bringing new energies into the center of this city. I'm going to do the lecture, excuse me, in three parts. I'll start with some views of two of Richmond's important streets, the ones that I've always thought of as being the streets that gave the identity to the city, just so that we have something to set in the second part of the lecture, which is what are the technologies that are emerging? What are the changes in our economies and in cities that we're going to have to accommodate? And then finally, I'll come back to those streets that I start with and share with you 5 ideas that I have for things that might help to envision the future of your streets here in Richmond. So let's get started, and hopefully all this is going to work. I have the usual problem that I work on Macs, and this is on a PC. So if somebody asks me what's the unique thing about Richmond in terms of its urban design structure, I think one of the remarkable things about this city is the fact that you have 2 streets, only 2 blocks apart, who are the kind of armature for the city. You have Broad Street, which was for many, many decades the commercial armature of the city, and you have Monument Avenue just 2 blocks away, which is the kind of symbolic and core of the residential areas that are spread out along it. I can't think of other cities around that have that kind of pattern of within 2 blocks being able to walk from the commercial heart of the city to the residential heart of the city. And that's something that I think it ought not to be lost as one moves forward in transforming the city. So Monument Avenue and Broad Street, as you see in red and green along this here. Monument Avenue is the symbolic center of the city. It is the place for its symbols. I'm going to avoid talking about the debates about who should be symbolized and where and when on this, but in fact, it occurs to me that if you don't have those things, then you have nothing to debate about that. And then just 2 blocks. And what's remarkable about Monument Avenue is how little it's changed over the last 100 years. Not quite 100 years. It wasn't done 100 years ago. It was a little bit after that. But it looks today very much like it looked at that time. On the other hand, I should say that there are days in which it changes. The street, which often is a kind of arterial for carrying cars, also can be the place for festivals and events. And it occurs to me that wouldn't it be nice to imagine that this street could be much more than just an arterial road with greenery along it and a place where occasionally there are festivals held. I'll leave you with that and we'll come back to it. Broad Street, on the other hand, was the commercial street, the commercial heart of the city. Much of it still remains, which is quite remarkable on it, but it was the place for one of the first streetcar lines in the United States. And what's interesting when you look at this illustration is how flexible that street was. If you needed to bring big vehicles in, you could do that. The street could be changed. People could walk across it from side to side. There weren't the usual kinds of resistances that separated out all of the functions of that street. And as automobiles arrived, they started to take over part of that street frontage. As the streetcars were replaced by buses, that also was capable of being handled. Of course, with the automobiles came congestion, came the need for more channeling of people as to where you could cross and other such things. But the sidewalks appear to also have been widened at that time so that you had places for the crowds that were going to the downtown. All of this, it seems to me, began to come apart with the introduction of major roadways into the downtown area and traffic volumes that no longer were easy to accommodate on those streets drove out other kinds of uses along the streets. And so when you look at streets like Main Street, This is a contrast between 1907 and what it looks like today from exactly the same intersection on it. And so much has been lost in that time period, but there's also much there that remains and can be built upon. To my taste, it's become too ordered and too civilized in terms of all of its uses. It needs to get a little messier. It needs to have more kinds of uses that bring people to it. And all of those enormous parking garages, I'll talk more about that in a minute, which deaden the streetscape, but were essential when you brought all those cars in on those expressways. But there are signs, as I said, of real progress. The Arts District is emerging on Broad Street. The BRT is there, and other kinds of things. And there, too, you wish that more of this could happen every day of the week, not just occasionally when there are festivals in the street. So my central point is that technological and social changes will require changes to the built environment. What are they? First, networked lifestyles. All of us are part of. Second, the new economy that's emerging. I think some of it here in the downtown area, but inevitably is going to emerge in all of those empty office buildings and spaces that are in the downtown area. Third, and most important, I think, the new forms of mobility that are upon us. And then finally, the changes in logistics. And this is not a trivial matter, but as I'll point out in a few minutes. So what do we mean by the changes in the economies? First of all, we are becoming a society of instant everything. We want to be able to order it, get it from anywhere, get it today. And the downside of that, of course, is that we don't go to the shops that we once went to get these things. Shops don't have the responsibility of trying to find the things that are happening somewhere else in the world and bringing them here so that we can have them. Amazon and many other apps are taking their place. The new shopping centers are these spaces, the Amazon fulfillment centers, and and the places where all those things are stored and get out to you the same day or within 2 days, no charge on it. And so we have a new kind of localism. It's a localism that delivers stuff to your front door. When I come home at night on West End Avenue, where I live in New York, outside our door are 10 or 20 boxes of groceries, waiting for the people to come home from work to take their food and go upstairs and cook it, and avoiding having to go to the grocery store or to other kinds of places. In fact, some of them will give you prepackaged meals in that form, and I notice that more and more people, including my daughter, are doing this these days. The effect of it is the vacating of malls all over the United States. I don't know whether you have empty malls here, dead ones here in Richmond, but certainly many parts of the country have that. And the emerging conversion of shopping centers in places. Horton Plaza was 20 years ago the best known inner city shopping area in the United States. Today it's a high-tech center. And there are retail on the ground floors to serve those people that are in it, but now it's essentially a WeWork kind of workplace incubator for new businesses in the center of the city. So what's happening to shopping? Shopping is becoming mostly a performance art. It's a place you go to experience things that you can't experience on your internet or you can't experience elsewhere. So on the top two slides, what you see here is a new kind of shop. You go into this shop and you can put together the clothes, try them on if you wish, onto a digital mannequin, so you can see what it looks like. And anything that they have in their catalog can be seen and put onto that. And then you order them and you go home, and 2 days later all those things arrive. Down below, the opposite extreme, durable goods, automobiles. Automobile showrooms are finding their way back into the centers of cities. And the one on the left is a Cadillac showroom in Lower Manhattan, where it's a part of a coffee shop and a place where people go in and work and network with their friends and other kinds of things. And oh, by the way, they can look at the new Cadillac cars that are available there. Tesla has, especially in Asia, created showrooms for most of its sales. They're not in the suburbs. They're in the downtown areas and shopping centers along main streets and other kinds of things. So I think we can and they demonstrate, what the car looked like before they put the body on the frame, and it's a performance that they give you when you visit those places. But there are other kinds of shops too, pop-up shops that try out new concepts. Trucks, food trucks, and other kinds of things that serve only 3 hours a day, and as part of the street life. Fashion shows that go on with a different person showing their merchandise every day of the week on it. And so this kind of constantly evolving, changing commercial life is what we have to look forward to and needs to be accommodated in some way if we're going to, in fact, continue to have shopping in the centers of cities. At the same time, work is also becoming very different. The shared workspace has become the norm for an increasing number of people every year. I'm told you have a couple of shared workspaces here in the center of your city. Even large corporations are placing their people in shared workspaces because they don't have to take on the responsibility of leasing a lot of space and worrying about whether they're going to have the people and business to fill that space on it. But not only shared workspaces, but shared manufacturing facilities, shared kitchens for caterers who are, they don't need a kitchen every day of the week. They only need it when they're doing a big event or some other such thing like that. They book the kitchen for a period of time. So this constant change of workplace is also the case on it. And there are whole business centers near the Hongqiao Airport in Shanghai. They've created a whole new business center, the only part of which is really prospering is a shared workspace. It's 5 stories in an office building that you can walk to from the airport and do your work and meet people and then go back home wherever you came from on it. Now, to those of us who are urban designers, I want to make a reference here. When I learned urban design, we were especially, enamored by a map that was done by Noli in 1748. And what this map showed was not just the street spaces, it shows all the public spaces in Rome. Not just the street spaces, but churches that you can go into, courtyards that you can go into. It was the matrix of all the places that you, as a member of the public, have access to in the center of the city. And the argument was that you should be planning for all of that, not just planning for the streets that were going from place to place in Rome. Some students at Columbia University did a map of the shared, this is the Noli map today, of a portion of Manhattan. And so all those orange places there are the places where people work collectively. They're either shared workspaces or they're a coffee shop where they go to talk with others, to meet with others. They're the lobby of the Ace Hotel, which is a place you go to and work during the day. And if you need to meet with people, they come and meet you there, and you have a coffee or a drink in the hotel bars that are in that place. But it's also on the 8th floor, the living room that people will rent you if you wish, if you need to have a meeting in it. And it's the cafeterias in some of the businesses that are there that are open to the public as well. So this is a 3-dimensional Noli map, and it's the new public space of the city that's used by people who are startups, people who are working on their own, the new ecology of work in the city. Now, some cities are taking it seriously, and they're creating things that will help encourage people to do that kind of work. In Boston, in a new district called that they call the Innovation District, which consists of a lot of shared workspaces and other such things, they've created a thing called District Hall. District Hall is where you can go and have lunch or book a room if you need a meeting, or have a drink after work with people, or go and sit for an hour with your computer and get caught up on your emails or other kinds of things. And this is considered a piece of the infrastructure of the city. And they had a developer, as a condition of giving them permission to build some stuff in that area, build this for the city, and it's operated by the city on it. So that's one example. Universities are creating innovation centers. At my university, at University of Pennsylvania, we created on a site just adjacent to the campus. It used to be DuPont's research and development site, a place called Pennovation Center. That's a place where anybody at the university can have shared workspace and start a business. Any faculty member, any student, have an idea, you can get in. It's very cheap. The university has made the space affordable to most people. There are meeting rooms there where you can meet with other people, and so on. And we consider that a kind of piece of the infrastructure of the innovation for the university. There are places like this in Brooklyn, New York, which is called Industry City. It's 6 million square feet of space that used to be warehouses that's filled, 100% filled, by companies that are startups or small-scale production operations and other kinds of things. And they also have the infrastructure you need, common kitchens. They have digital cutters and all that kind of stuff that you can rent by the hour. They have places for coffee and outdoor eating, etc. One of the most remarkable projects of this kind in the world is in Paris. It's a place called Station F. It's an old train station that's been, that a entrepreneur, a person who started a media company, made a lot of money, has created because he was worried that the French aren't producing any innovations. And so they created this place, which is an incubator of new businesses. It was all of the major companies, the banks, the advertising companies, the accounting companies, other people have little outposts there to help people with their business plans and with getting started with their businesses. In this building, there are 4,000 people on any given day working on business plans and creating new enterprises out of the ideas that they have. They have to be chosen. They have many more applicants than that, and they're only there for 6 months maximum. And by that time, they either have a business plan and they're out there getting going, or they should be doing something else on it. And in China, live-work housing has become the norm. This place that you see on the left here is a University Avenue. It consists of housing above almost every one of those housing units. They're designed so that you can work in your house. Almost every one of those units has a business or two that's going on in that place, and on the ground floor are the restaurants and places to meet with your colleagues and other kinds of things. And I end with this discourse on this with this picture. This picture, which is one of the most remarkable buildings that's been built in many years, is in Beijing. It's called the Soho Galaxy. It was syndicated so that it was broken into little pieces, 1,500 square feet a piece, and sold to people. Now, some people bought them to start their business. Some of them rent to others who start their business. And if you look at the plan of that building, here's what you see. You see 1,500 square foot pieces in that. And so the office building of the future is going to be an office building that has to accommodate many people whose businesses will shrink or will expand, need more space, need to take on more space, etc. It's a whole different kind of ecology. And that's, of course, what's happening in our high-tech areas in Silicon Valley, where open spaces that can be reorganized, changed, are the thing that people are preferring. So let me shift gears to technologies. Does anyone here believe that the automobile or the vehicle that you're going to be getting around in 10 years from now is going to look like the one you're using today? Anybody? Well, if they're going to change, why are we designing streets the same way? Why are we designing the places that they're going to move on in the same way? So that's the question I want to ask by the next set of images. What we've been doing for the last 25 years in transportation planning is basically, I think, three things. One, channeling people, getting them into lanes that are for turning, or lanes that are for express, lanes that are for this, lanes that are for that, or bus lanes that are separate from car lanes, etc. We've been trying to keep people in constant motion. And that's where the Richmond traffic circle has all of a sudden had new life all over the country in terms of people reintroducing them as a way to keep traffic moving. We've also, as in China, been differentiating the kind of uses that occur on the street down to a fine grain. And then finally, or most recently, we've been charging people for using streets. And that New York has just passed a congestion charging scheme. But we charge people at different times a day more money to park in some parking meters than in other parking meters, and so on and so on. One of the problems we've faced is this problem, which is that on the left-hand side you see congested street with 200 people in 177 cars. On average, in the US, each car has 1.3 people in it. So on the right is what's really going on that street. And if that's the case, why are we driving these big cars everywhere that we go? Well, people have wakened up to that, and auto manufacturers are now, producing a whole range of kinds of vehicles, some small, some large, some to transport things, some not, and so on. But so are a lot of other people creating new kinds of vehicles. And so we have smart cars. We have smart cars for handicapped people. We have things that look like mass transit lines that used to have rails that don't have rails anymore, that go on streets. We have you can see all of the things. We have autonomous buses. I'll come back to that because that's actually one of the most important things that we're going to have to cope with. We have bicycles that no longer are tethered to a place where you have to pick them up and leave them, but you can leave them anywhere in the city. In fact, if you go to China, Chinese cities are absolutely overflowing with bicycles everywhere. And, people are paying by the minute for the use of those things, but it's worth it to have a bicycle outside your front door so you can get on it and go somewhere else and have somebody else maintain it. The big revolution, of course, is electric vehicles, electric scooters, electric bicycles, and so on. And this is going to, in fact, exponentially increase the number of people that are using those. So we have small scooters as well. We have you can get on demand and now leave anywhere you wish in some places, depending on the program. And it's always occurred to me that we will have handicap vehicles as well that are on demand. Where and where do they go on the street? Do they go on the roadway? Do they go on the sidewalk? As we know these things today, we have to begin to think about how do we accommodate the scooters, the handicapped vehicles, the electric bicycles, all of those other kinds of vehicles that are there. Now, we also have the sharing economy, which is in some ways the most profound thing that we've done. In Paris, they have electric shared vehicles available on the road. You just on the sidewalk, you go and pick it up and rent it for you rent it on the internet, and then you go there and get it. I don't actually have a car in New York anymore. I use car share when I need a car. I can get whatever kind of vehicle I want a block from my house. I can leave it in various other kinds of places around on it. Uber is a very interesting sharing, both Uber and Lyft. When Uber started offering shared rides, people in New York said, "Shared rides? You think I would take a taxi with somebody else?" Well, 30% of the rides that Uber gives are shared. That is, they pick people up in two different places and then take them to two different places. In San Francisco, 50% of the rides are shared. In Los Angeles, it's almost the same amount on it there. And so what we're having is two kinds of sharing. One is the sharing of the use of vehicles, and the other is the sharing of on-demand vehicles that are changing things. Now, what will this do? My colleague, Carlo Ratti at MIT, has made an estimate of how many vehicles it would take in Manhattan to satisfy all the demand for travel that are now is now satisfied by all of the by Uber and Lyft and all of the other car share services and the taxis. And he computes that you could use 30% of the vehicles that are on the roads today and satisfy everybody's mobility needs. So that could result in a substantial decrease in the number of cars that are coming into the centers of cities and other places, liberating roadways, lanes on roadways that aren't needed anymore as a result of that. And now, what do we do with those kinds of roadways? Well, part of the revolution will be in shared minibuses, and they're happening already today. On the upper left, you see a autonomous minibus, seats 8 to 12 people. It's in the Brooklyn Navy Yard. It makes several loops around the Navy Yard and picks people up and drops them off and takes them to the nearest subway station and other kinds of things. You will be able to have shared demand routes for these kinds of buses. You go on your internet and you say, I want to go to I am at, or you wouldn't even say that because it'll tell the dispatching service that, but I want to go to Y, and it will simply route a minibus to where you are and take you to your destination, along with 6 or 8 or 10 other people that it's taking there. And a large fraction of the bus service that will be offered in the future in autonomous buses will not have fixed routes. Some will, but a lot of them won't. And in Greece, they're already using that. I was in a place in Shanghai, in Beijing, a couple of weeks ago, and they were operating autonomous buses, taking people from place to place throughout that. So this is not a pie in the sky. This is actually happening. Now, the other great revolution of the technology is the collision avoidance systems. Now, collision avoidance systems mean that you won't crash into the person in front of you or beside you because you'll either be warned or in the future you'll be prevented from crashing into them. So what'll that do? Well, one thing it'll do, it'll allow cars to travel at a fraction of the distance behind the automobile in front of them. And as what this on the right shows, the vehicles will be able to, no, I'm sorry, the one on the left shows that vehicles will be able to, when all cars have collision avoidance systems in it, they will take 30% of the road space that you're taking today. So with that, we can make a couple of choices. We can either choose to let more people to drive on the roads and have more congestion you have to deal with, or we can use some of those roads for other kinds of purposes. The projections vary all over about when autonomous cars and partially autonomous cars will begin to take over the sales and the percentage on the fleet, but it's not tomorrow. But by 2030, a substantial number of the cars will be either fully autonomous or partially autonomous with collision avoidance systems and driving with the driver sitting in the car just serving as a backup to the vehicle. And it will take several steps. The current ownership model will yield to on-demand vehicles like Lyft and Uber and other such things, then add shared on-demand vehicles. Those things are already happening. Add collision avoidance tech, and then finally to totally autonomous vehicles. And so we see this happening in our cities today all over. On it, and we see some cities responding to this. Columbus, Ohio, has created an autonomous circulator bus through its downtown area as a kind of trial, and the next step is that it'll become autonomous. They've also created autonomous minibuses that go on demand. You tell them where you want to go, and it collects you and several others along the way and gets you to your destination on it. The other big change that will occur is in parking. Today, in the United States, on average, there are about 7 parking spaces for every vehicle in a city. You say, where? Yeah, well, I'm still looking for parking. But you have one at your house, and you have one at your workspace. You have one at the shopping center that you go to. You have one in every place, every destination you go to, has spaces sitting there waiting for you on this. So what if you didn't need all those parking spaces? If you have autonomous vehicles that never park, they just travel the streets and pick up people and take them here or there. On average, a typical car in the United States sits idle for around 90% of its time. 90% of its day is just sitting there in a parking spot. 10% of it is driving you to work or taking you somewhere here or elsewhere on this kind of stuff. And so the need for parking will go down dramatically. What parking there is will be done autonomously. You will drive your car into a drop-off place, step out of the car will park itself. When you're coming, you'll dial up and tell them, I need my car, and it'll get it. Meantime, they'll park the cars sort of like they are up on the upper right, jammed together, because they'll have put your car in a place knowing roughly when you're going to leave, and so on and so on. So these technologies will reduce up to 70% of the parking needs in our collective areas. And parking garages will then have to get designed differently too. First of all, the ramp garages are no use, because you can't stack cars on those things. Flat garages are all you really should be using in the city, or using car storage systems that file your car in this big filing box in the sky. Some garages will be designed so that they can be used for other purposes. Some of you may have seen this wonderful multi-use garage in Miami Beach, actually, where it's used for events on the weekends, and so they have high ceilings, and you can have a party in there, or you can have a bar on another one, a pop-up bar on it, etc., because you don't need that sitting there empty and on the weekends on it. And so we'll have to begin thinking differently about how we do the parking that remains. And then there's the issue of logistics and infrastructure. With all of that on-demand stuff that we're ordering, it has to be dealt with. And so on a street corner near my house on the upper right, you see what's going on. They bring a big truck, they load all of the people onto all the stuff onto the sidewalk, and then people spend the day taking it on carriages down the street and dropping it off at the doors of apartment buildings along that block. In the morning, when the UPS trucks leave their station, they look like the image on the lower part, and on the upper left-hand side, commercial areas often look like this in the city today. We don't have any space on the sidewalks. We don't have space for these kinds of things. But they're not there forever, those big trucks. there are autonomous delivery vehicles that are also being pioneered. And so you see one on the upper right-hand side there, one on the left. Kroger is piloting a autonomous grocery delivery service. Arrives at your front door and buzzes you on your cell phone. You go out and get your groceries, take them in there, and drives off and gives another person their groceries, et cetera, et cetera. Amazon Prime is trying these things. I actually, in a new area in Beijing, saw one of these working. They were delivering all the packages for the several office buildings that were in this area. So what happens to them when they get there? That's a good question. Here's Mercedes has a van that they're creating with robots as the things inside of it, and they stop it, and the robots drive out of the van and go and deliver their stuff and come back to the van, and they drive off afterwards. So what do you do with it when it gets there? Well, there are some places that have now created parcel motels. And there are places where you can come and get your stuff. They're like the old mailbox in the post office, but large enough to get an Amazon Prime parcel in it. So those are some of the potentials. What do we do about it? Well, I showed this image at the front, and if you look carefully at this image, you'll see there are all kinds of places here that we don't have space for in the cities, places to unload things, places where the Uber car can stop and wait for the person to come and get into the car, places for bicycles and scooters to ride, various kinds of vehicles on here, delivery vehicles of various kinds on it. I won't go into it in detail, but there are also cable cars and I haven't even mentioned drones that we'll be delivering some stuff to as well. Hopefully the right stuff on it. So here are 5 things that I think are responses that we might have to make to that and to other things as well. One is managing the curb. The most important spot on the street is going to be the curb. So you see only one truck here, one UPS truck here, but I can guarantee that along that street there are a lot more things being delivered than that. And so managing that. And on the left-hand side, we see people parking on that street, but there will be as many people getting Uber cars and shared cars of various kinds and that need to be there. And what about that car that you get where it's a self-serve car that it's one way, you take it to your destination. Where do you leave it on the street? There's got to be some places on this to park them on the street or garages or other kinds of places to be able to do that. And so streets, which are now in many cities really dogged by congestion at the curb, will need to have whole new zones created that are capable of accommodating all of these new vehicles and these new kinds of needs. So there will be paratransit and accessible loading areas. There will be metered parking spots, but also passenger drop-off zones for people arriving on Uber cars. There will be food trucks, which are really needed only a few hours of the day on the street, and so on. And you'll have to begin thinking about streets, the curb, not as fixed things, but as things that change throughout the course of the day. So in the morning, people are being dropped off and deliveries are arriving on it. At noon, people are looking for lunch, and so the food trucks will be there, and the places to sit have to be created for them. In the evening, people will be out for walks, and they'll be going to sidewalk cafes and gathering before they go to the theater, doing other kinds of things like that. And nighttime to midnight, their whole other set of activities will find their way there. And so farmers markets and food trucks and all of these pieces have to become part of the curb and thought of as being part of the curb. Now, somebody asked, how do you enforce all this? You got all these these things are changing all over the day, and how do you do some? How do you enforce it? There is an app, a wonderful app out, which is used to report people who are parked illegally or using the street illegally. And so you just take a picture on your cell phone and send it off, and it gets to the appropriate agency of the city, goes out and gives a ticket to that person, and so it's a you can have self-enforcing systems using this technology as well on it. Second idea, slow lanes. We need slow lanes on streets. In the past, we've always wanted to get fast lanes. That is, how do you get express lanes? How do you get people moving more quickly? We're going to need slow lanes. Slow lanes for all those vehicles that don't go more than 15 miles an hour. Not just bicycles. I mean, we've been doing bicycle lanes and things like that. But in many streets, we're going to need to reserve a whole zone for the scooters and the handicap wheelchair, motorized wheelchairs for all of the new vehicles, the electric vehicles and all of that kind of stuff. And so bicycle lanes aren't the only users of this, and they probably have to be wider than the bicycle lanes are today on it. And that's one of the uses. This shows it rather nicely. It could even be cars that are bringing handicapped people to drop them off in those slow lanes and going very slowly for that part of it on it. It's also where the robots to deliver your stuff are going to have to go on it. So creating slow lanes, and New York has been experimenting with some of these wide areas along portions of Broadway and elsewhere, and creating in those areas waiting places for the autonomous transit that's going to be using those streets, or waiting places for people who are being picked up by car shares on it. Here's another example of how that might occur. There are various ways you can combine this. This is, I think, a slow lane on the left-hand side. On the bottom, the main traffic lanes are on the right-hand side. So what they've done there is, I think, is essentially taken over half of the roadway, because we don't have as many cars anymore on those streets. Taken over half the roadway and used it for slow lanes on it. And of course, you may have to try them out, to make sure that they work and that there aren't so many people angry at you that they can the whole system that you're trying to do here. But cities are doing that, and this seems to me like a better kind of mixture of things on the street than the current one that we have on it. Third idea. It's what people are calling fluid streets. We've been painting street lines on all of our roadways for a long time now. Street lines that tell you that only buses can go here and only cars can go here, and you got to stay in your lane, and only bicycles can go over here. In a way, we need to go back to what Broad Street looked like in the early years, where people could walk across the street at almost any time. And we can do that because, with collisions avoidance systems in our cars and vehicles, they're not going to hit you. They're going to stop before they hit you. And bicycles can use that too, and just mixed in with traffic. You don't have to necessarily segregate them out of it. And so this is a really nice study that you can look up on the internet. It's done by a wonderful architectural firm called BIG, Bjork Ingels Group. And what they looked at for Audi is, what would new streets look like with all of these collision avoidance systems and these new vehicles that are there? Well, first thing they argued was that you get rid of the traffic lights. You don't need traffic signals anymore. The cars will avoid each other, and people walking across those streets, etc. Get rid of the lanes, because you can squeeze a lot more cars than what you can now at an intersection if they're within a foot of each other or a foot and a half of each other, than what you have to reserve if they're crazy drivers who are not good at maneuvering those cars on it. And so what we have is a fluid circulation space from front of the building to front of the building. And you can begin to use it in ways that mix stuff. Now that's exactly the opposite of what I just said about doing slow lanes, but maybe there are different streets for different kinds of purposes. And so this wonderful sketch of the Potsdamer Platz in Berlin, which they did, shows bicycles and pedestrians and cars all inhabiting the space at the same time. Nobody's hitting each other with them, and not only that, but you can actually begin reserving areas for events and performances and other kinds of things at the same time. Cars are going by, fewer cars at that time of the day. This sketch here shows how you could have a rock band playing in the center of the space and have cars avoiding them, going around them, and bicycles going around them. So it's no longer necessary to think of streets as being that absolutely rigid, channeled set of spaces. You can think of it as ever-changing, fluid spaces where many kinds of things can occur. Some cities are doing this. Exhibition Road in London is one of those streets that's been designed so that it can be used differently over the course of the day. Cars can use it, bicycles, people, events can go on in that space, and so on. And they're putting down the markers for the future of many other streets in the city. The fourth idea is that of living streets. For smaller streets, there is really no reason why we can't imagine the street space, the pedestrian space, extending across the whole width of the roadway. Used to be that we built pedestrian malls and kept all of the cars off the street. There's no good reason why we have to keep the cars off the street today, but there's no reason why people can't use those spaces for living. And so in a street like this one in your city, why not have the same pavement go all the way across from side to side? And maybe you have some temporary markers that suggest where cars ought to drive on this street, or where you can park cars or other things like that. But you could change those in a minute and make a sidewalk cafe out of that. In Bangkok, Thailand, for any of you that have been there are a lot of plazas outside of the major bank buildings. And those plazas become outdoor eating places in the evenings. They move their kitchens in, and they put their chairs in the place, and they become outdoor spaces for people to live in. They live in those streets on it. Or for this district of Richmond that you have, why couldn't you do as they've done in Santa Monica? Santa Monica had a pedestrian mall which almost killed the street. Because nobody would go there. So they decided they would put the cars back into the street, but in the evenings prohibit cars from coming, because that's when all the people come and want to go to the shops and the restaurants and other kinds of things that are along the street. So you can manage a street, a living street, so that it can do many of those functions. This is a really terrific street in Halifax, Nova Scotia in Canada, which they've done that from curb to curb. Or from front door to front door of the buildings. They've created one pavement, and they manage it and they organize it in very different kinds of ways every day of the week, every week of the year, special occasions and regular occasions. And this may be the way we want to start thinking about more of our streets in cities where you don't have this massive need to carry large volumes of traffic. Finally, this doesn't quite fit with the other ones, but it occurred to me when I was looking at those pictures of Monument Avenue, and what I was seeing was streets that look exactly the same as they looked in 1924 when they were building the houses along there, or even before then. I thought to myself, why isn't somebody making use of this street? Why isn't the median being used for something? Why isn't this really the center of that neighborhood, those several residential neighborhoods that border on this along the way? And so also, why not use it, parts of it, as an incredible floral demonstration area? Neighbors, I'm sure, would take on the job of planting parts of these with native plants and showing them off, and taking responsibility for a portion of it on it. And why isn't it being done as a ecological street, where all of the water that runs off those roadways gets used for the plantings and the native and the grasses and native grasses and other kinds of things in the center of the street, and even on the sides of the street as well. Other cities like Philadelphia have done that. They've also taken boulevards like that and put all the slow lanes up the center of them. It's actually a pretty good place for it. Doesn't steal away from the roadways that are along that street. Some cities like St. Louis have revived gardens along major boulevards. In this case, the axis that goes up the center of the downtown area made it into this splendid garden that people walk on. I mean, it occurred to me that it would be wonderful if people were taking tours down the center of the boulevard and seeing all of the various kinds of planting and displays along it. And as they are on the left-hand side here, why aren't there children's play spaces in that street where you can take kids on it? Why aren't there exercise classes and yoga classes taking place right in the center of that street? Why aren't we doing art projects that make use of the center of that street? And instead of having a single monument every few blocks along its length, why not make the whole street a kind of celebration of life in the city, and a place that also accommodates all of the new kinds of mobilities? So that's it. Some ideas. This is all speculation, of course. Nobody really knows what's going to happen, but that's the point, which is that you have to make it happen, and so perhaps this will stimulate some ideas in your minds. Thank you.
Hi. So, how much do you think residential density plays into making some of these things work with new mobility? So, Manhattan is way more dense than Richmond, a mid-sized city. What are your thoughts on that in general?
Yeah.
Increased density in Richmond to make it work? Thoughts on other size cities that are doing things like this?
Okay. You know you're in trouble when your former students ask you questions. And so, yes, density matters. And it certainly drives a lot of what's going on in New York City. But the new mobilities are actually taking root in San Francisco, which for the most part is not that dense, or LA, which isn't that dense. In fact, I saw neighborhoods today in the center of this city, which are denser than most of those neighborhoods in the West Coast that are where people are beginning to use all of these new technologies. I thought I wasn't really impressed. Jim showed me a few streets that had mixtures of housing, of single-family houses, very beautiful ones that have been restored, along with 12-unit apartment buildings or 6-unit apartment buildings, mixed in with same scale, same height, etc. Now, what that does is two things. I mean, one is it brings more people there, so that actually helps get the densities up on it. But secondly, it brings different kinds of people there, and people probably who are more amenable to the use of some of these new technologies, younger people, or people like retirement people who may want to use these kinds of technologies more. And so I think it is actually a positive, it will have a positive impact on it. So I'm always an advocate of increasing the density. In many cities in the country, and in Canada especially, they're talking about what's called the missing middle. The missing middle is all of those kinds of housing that are not single-family houses and not high-rise apartment buildings, but low-rise apartments, two-family houses with second units in the back, all of those other kinds of things. You can increase the density of an area without really detracting from the character of that area by just allowing those kinds of uses to occur.
This was a really interesting presentation. Around 1970, there was a very small startup in the Boston area called Star Car. Yeah. I don't know if you ever heard of it.
Yeah.
It had a hybrid system of individual vehicles that could be driven on the street, but also that could be access a network of lanes, of electronic lanes,
Yes.
I guess, that got you faster to where you wanted to go.
Yeah.
It never really took off, and maybe that's because the computer technology wasn't adequate at the time. Do you have any idea of whether that's a way to solve any transportation problems?
Yeah. Well, I think it was way ahead of the time, but it also was aimed at increasing speed and mostly what we have today. It's a different time. It's a different world. It's think of it. It's only been 25 years that we've had the internet available to people. That was after the Star Car was tried, and with that thing in your hand that you won't let go of, you can order things. You can order cars, or you can tell buses where you want them to go. And we now have the capacity to produce apps that can do the logistics and management of vehicles, so that you don't need somebody to drive the vehicle today. And I just think it's a different time. The time is ripe now for this kind of stuff to occur, and it is occurring. I mean, just think of the electric bicycle, which you go to the corner, you go wherever you see it, sitting there, you put your iPhone up to it. If it's free, it tells you. If it's available, it tells you. You get on it, and it has registered you and starts charging you for the use of that vehicle. And when you drop it off, wherever you drop it off, it knows there's a bicycle over there as well. You can look on your iPhone and see where there are bicycles available. I mean, all of this technology that's available now makes it a very different kind of thing.
Thank you.
So I know there's been a lot of discussion about how to bring vitality and vibrancy back to streets, creating open streets, cyclovia type of programming, but there's also the concern of terrorism and attacks. So how would you address those concerns?
Tourism and attacks?
Terrorism.
Terrorism and attacks.
So I'm an urban planner for the city, also an alumni from VCU. And there are several projects that speak to having bollards on sidewalks or hardening security around specific areas, but also other ideas out there to open a street to rollerbladers and people that bike and runners. But there's also this other side that is concerned with someone just driving a Mack truck right down the middle of that. So just curious of what your thoughts are.
this is not a field that I'm an expert at, and I've had some bad experiences in this area. I worked with Dan Liebeskind on the plans for the World Trade Center redevelopment, and there this was a big issue because you could almost predict that somebody is going to try to bomb or do something damage to that building that was going to be built on it. In fact, I had. Some years ago, before 1993, I had an office on the 86th floor of the World Trade Center. The year after when I was planning the West Side Waterfront, the year after I gave that up, they put a bomb in the basement of the World Trade Center and killed a lot of people and did a lot of damage to it. But when we came to planning for the World Trade Center redevelopment in this round, we had a whole army of people who were, tourism, or who were experts on all of the kinds of threats that it could face on it. And I have to say, it struck me that the kind of changes that you can make in the physical environment of a place are not likely to deter people who are determined and want to cause damage. We, for example, on the World Trade Center, I insisted, and we got our way, that we would bring 2 streets through the center of the site to break it down into smaller blocks and not have this mega block that was there before. Well, I'm sad to say that both of those streets are closed to traffic now because of the security people. But you can walk onto the street with a briefcase and with a bomb in it or anything like that. So I'm not sure exactly what it is that it's accomplishing on it. And what it's doing is, cutting down on the kind of ability of people to move through that area and for it to be a part of the city. So I don't know the solution about driving a Mack truck down a street with a lot of people on it. You can use bollards at the end. You can make it circuitous so that it's not so easy for them to get onto that street. But we built on the West Side Waterfront in New York. We built the first bicycle lanes of any street in Manhattan. And it's incredibly heavily used, and we were very careful about it because we made only 2 places where you could get onto that, and you needed to because you had to have snowplows and other things in the winter months to go onto it, and they were very small, and there were 40 blocks apart, the 2 places where you could do it. Well, as you probably know, somebody rented a truck in New Jersey and drove up onto it on one of those and went down the street and began mowing down people on that. So it's very hard to use physical barriers as the way to make places safe. Physical plus human watching helps. That's what they've done basically in Lower Manhattan. But there's still ways that can be confounded.
I'm wondering, in the world of autonomous vehicles, is there a danger that we'll run into a situation of sort of pedestrian terrorism, where pedestrians can walk across interstates at any speed and just upset flow, or in the cities by just cars will stop for them wherever they go and impede flow?
Certainly, there's a lot of talk about people corrupting the systems of autonomous vehicles, and reprogramming them and doing other kinds of things. And I don't know the answer on that. You need to know a lot more about the programming to be able to answer that question. But there are vehicles on the road today. I mean, Volvo has committed to have 0 accidents in its cars by 2030. and by 25 to have a complete collision avoidance system in place. My son bought a Volvo car recently, and it would not allow him to crash into a car in front of him. It'll stop the car. So it's happening. Whether you can corrupt that and is another kind of question. And you can bet that there are a lot of people, and a lot of them smarter than me, that are working on that problem.
Hi there. With the climate implications and the damage of automobiles to the environment, would it be a conscious idea to start planning for either phasing out private automobiles or cars completely?
Well, no, I think there will be different kinds of cars, not one kind of car, but many kinds of cars that are used by people for different purposes on it. Some of which they own, some of which they don't own. Many people will not own cars in the future on it. I think the more likely thing that will happen is that we'll go to electric vehicles. China has said that they will not allow their auto companies to sell electric vehicles after 2030. None. Volvo has committed that they will sell no gasoline-powered vehicles after 2025. And so this is happening already. And the battery technologies are improving to the point where it's going to be possible for most trips to be able to not have any gasoline-powered vehicles.
So, the Boring Company by Elon Musk, how they want to take a lot of traffic and dig tunnels underground and kind of ease up all of those things. Do you see that being a viable, solution to a lot of the traffic issues, or do you think that's just kind of like a pipe dream? No pun intended, though.
Yeah. I've looked at the Hyperloop stuff that Elon Musk has been working on. It's kind of a wonderful fantasy. There have been fantasies about this for a long time, actually, on it. And actually, in Chicago, starting in 1905, they built an underground railway in the Loop area of Chicago. They delivered all of the coal that was required for the buildings. They delivered all of the parcels and all of the raw materials that were needed for the manufacturing buildings that were all over the central loop of Chicago. And that ran until 1952, that railway. It also, a few years ago, they had a big flood that flooded the whole railway underground in that area. So this is not a new idea. Elon Musk has proposed using these hyperloops in a lot of different applications, but the one I'm particularly interested in is one which I didn't show today because there had too many slides already, but where they pick up freight at the ports, and they deliver the freight in sort of containers to cities and other places very quickly, and where buildings are designed so that they can take that container that it's in, send it directly up in an elevator to wherever its destination is, and then put it down and send it back to get filled up again. And I think that we're going to need, for a lot of things, these kinds of new technologies of logistics, because if you drive the Jersey Turnpike, for example, half of the vehicles on the Jersey Turnpike are trucks. And that's a major polluter, but it's also an incredibly inefficient way to handle those kinds of things.
So, kind of in the same breath as the last question, I was wondering if your opinion on developing trains as public transit versus developing autonomous buses, which one do you think will carry the most weight at this point in
Yeah.
time?
That's a good question, because I think actually what we're going to see is both systems in place. I was thinking about as I saw your BRT system here, which runs a very long run, through the center of the city in both directions on it. There are routes like that where you have a lot of demand regularly, and either bus rapid transit or a light rail system or some other kind of system like that is what's going to be needed for those kind of large trips. But the problem is there's what people call the last mile. So if you get off your train or your bus in the suburban area, how do you get to your house? Or how do you get to an area that isn't on the main line, in the downtown area? And that's where all of these other vehicles, the scooters, the shared vehicles and all of that kind of stuff come in. And they're really essential for doing that. So they're essential to make the long haul transit work.
You kind of addressed my question just now, but I was going to say the conversation has kind of been around autonomous vehicles in more dense areas. What do you think the effect will be in the suburbs, or maybe somewhere where there's not as much dense development? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well, I have a colleague who looks at the demographics of cities and predicts that actually the demand for single-family detached houses in the suburbs is likely to go down over the next period of time. And because, one, a lot of people don't want to live in low-density areas because of the isolation, because of the lack of opportunity for part-time work or other kinds of things like that, and also because they like the excitement of the city, and an increasing amount of the employment is going to be, I think, in these innovative new firms and companies that are being created, and they're not going to be in the suburbs. Now, having said that, Silicon Valley's in the suburbs as well on it. But what's going on in Silicon Valley is very interesting, because they're building downtowns there because they can't get their workers to live out there. Can't afford it, for one thing, but they don't want to live there, and so Facebook and Google and other people like that are sending sending buses into San Francisco to pick up their employees and bring them out to the suburbs where they are. They're also increasingly putting their people in the center city. Google now has 9,000 people working in Manhattan. And so they go where the skills are on it, and so I think some of these things will help to get to the last mile from the end of where transit stops. But I think also that the problem is going to shade differently in the future as more and more people are looking to employment, different kind of employment, and different kind of living patterns.
It's just interesting to think about like growth management, like when will the last mile stop, But
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi. My question kind of follows the last two questions about like what happens when these autonomous vehicles leave the community and like this long distance travel. But I'm interested in like multimodal transportation and trying to not only add the level of autonomy, but also add the level of what happens when you leave a community and like how the regulations and restrictions kind of fall into that.
Well, if you have, I think the move to having smaller buses is actually going to benefit people who live in lower densities. Because today, if you have low densities, you can't afford to certainly with a driver, you can't afford to give very good service to a suburban area. If you just dial up on your iPhone that you need a ride from my place to the school that's down there, or to the shopping place that you want to go to over there, and within 5 minutes they appear at your door, and there are only 6 people on that bus, you know, so they're not going to be stopping everywhere along the way on it. That should actually work to the advantage of people who are living in lower densities.
What about like airplanes and like rail? Like, how do you think that's going to be impacted? Like, do you think you're going to approach this with the same theoretical approach?
I wish we had the kind of rail systems they have in the rest of the world. But I'll tell you a story about that. I took a train from Shanghai to Beijing. It took under 3 hours. It's about 1,000 miles. And I got out of the station at Beijing, and it took me 45 minutes to get a taxi cab. And it took me another 2 hours to get to my hotel.
Take some, you lose
So,
some, I guess.
Solving the long distance problem doesn't solve the short distance problem.
All right, thank you.
Hi. So many downtown cities, including Richmond, their goals for sustainability is to enhance Richmond's energy resilience by reducing overall energy consumption. So my question is, how do you think that these workspace buildings, the drones, the grocery delivery services are mentioned in the presentation, how will they be helpful or not for cities with this goal?
Well, I think there have been some studies done recently on these autonomous vehicles generally, as to whether they contribute to energy savings or add to the energy that's consumed. And let me start with the ones that are there. And they found that basically one of the problems today, if you call an Uber car, for example, that Uber car is sort of traveling the streets waiting for somebody to call them. And so they're burning gasoline when they're doing that, and then they come to pick you up, and you're not there. You have to come down from the building and to there. So they sit there for 5 minutes, idling more in that location, and then they take you to your destination, and then it all starts over again. And even with that, what they found is that there's some savings on energy for these kinds of systems over taxis or other kinds of standard automobiles on it. I would expect that the robots that are delivering this kind of stuff they're all going to be all electric to start with. It's an incredibly efficient thing to do on it. They're very small, they're not very heavy, they don't consume much energy to do those kinds of things. And once they get the right technology in place, it should be a net saving, because otherwise you have to drive your car to a grocery store and get your stuff and then bring it back home, park it in some place. You're taking up space in a parking garage with that car, et cetera, et cetera.
Thank you.
Okay.